bringing the people behind our food to life.
Now we just have the back leg. The back leg is a little bit different than the shoulder in terms of the bones that we're going to take out, but the trotter and the hock are about the same. The only thing to know is that the trotter is a little harder to take off just with a knife on the back leg. There's more tendons holding it together, so I tend to use a saw for that, but I still use my knife to make that initial cut. Okay, that's also nice trotter. It's got lots of gelatin and lots of marrow in there, so that's going to make that stock pot taste better. Okay, and then we're going to take our hock off. A little bit larger than that front hock, but we're going to do the same thing. So we're going to cut this, just like we did on the shoulder. And then we're going to use our saw. That. So that hock has nice meat on there as well. One thing that I wanted to note is that when you saw bone, you get a lot of bone dust in there. So you're going to want to get your towel wet and just kind of wipe that off. That can attract bacteria. It also just doesn't look that good, not nice to bite into. So just make sure you clean that up. Okay, so there's our hock and our trotter. So now I'm going to take, before I start to debone this, I'm going to take the skin off, and usually I'll just make a little incision there. I'm not going too deep, like that. And then I'm just going to start peeling that skin away, and leaving as much fat as I can on those roasts. And keep in mind that as you cut, it's going to seem like the fat stays closer to the skin, but it actually starts to get less deep. So like right now I'm cutting a little bit into the meat there. So I just want to make sure that I keep pressing up towards that skin, so I'm letting all that meat stay intact. Okay, so there's one side. And again, you don't have to take the skin off. You can always leave that on a roast, but in case you don't like the skin, I just want to show you how easy it is to get that off. And it's actually a good way to practice your knife skills, to practice making those long cuts. So there I got into a little bit of meat, no biggie, but just so you can see kind of how that curves around. Okay. So there's one nice piece of skin with the USDA stamp on it. Another piece there. There we go. Okay, so now you can kind of see it's not the same as this back fat on the pork chop, but there's a good 1/2 inch or 1/4 inch of fat on there. So now I'm going to take the H bone out, which is this funky little bone right there. This is probably even trickier than the shoulder blade, but it can be done. Anyone can do it with a little bit of practice. And again, you're just using your knife, pushing against that bone and carving around that little S shape there. And one of the funny things about this bone is that there's a hole right there. So if you have a meat hook, you can stick your meat hook in there and hold on to it. And then you can see there's a bone right there that it's attached to. Actually, that's part of the H-bone. And then there's another ball and socket joint right there that we're gonna disarticulate. And when in doubt, I stick my fingers where my knife can't go so that I can see kind of where that bone is curving, because this bone really does some kind of funky little tricks on you. And it's better to stick your finger in there than the knife so that you can keep those muscles all intact. I'm going to go ahead and just cut this little scrap of fat off here. That also allows me to see what's going on underneath. Okay, so now I've basically revealed where that ball and socket are. So I'm going to try to stick my knife in there if I can. And again, disarticulate that tendon that's holding it onto that bone, that leg bone. So now I've actually detached it and I can get my knife in there to take it off. And this is why that flexible knife is really nice to have, because it can do turns that a stiff knife probably couldn't. And again, I'm using that hole as a little hook for my finger. Okay, so that teeny tiny bone takes quite a bit of work to get out. So that's the H bone. So now we revealed that little ball at the end of the leg bone, which ends right here, so it runs just like that. Now the back leg is fun to butcher once you've gotten that H bone out, because the seams are really obvious. And what we have here is about 5 small muscle groups that all have fascia in between it. So it's really easy to just, even if you don't know what you're doing, to just kind of use your fingers to find where those seams are. And you can also use vision. So you can see here there's the meat, hits the meat right about there. That's actually the end of this muscle group that's called the top round. So I just use that line to guide me. And to basically peel this top round off the top of the leg. And all of this is the top round as well. I'm actually going to cut through that a little bit. And I'm going to make a little roast out of this. So there's that seam. So again, looks like kind of a funky piece, but all you got to do is trim it up and then tie it nicely. And I would put that in brine, simple sugar and salt brine, for about a day, and then I could smoke that, I could roast it, turn it into lunch meat if I wanted to. It's a lot of things you can do with it. Okay, then I'm going to find, next step is to basically do what I did on that shoulder, where I follow that bone and open up this ham like a book. So I'm just cutting around that bone. I'm going to turn this into a little roast, and this is actually something I would turn into what the French call a noix de jambon, which means sort of the nut of the ham. I would take this and tie it really tightly, and then I'd salt it overnight, and then I would pepper it very generously and hang it in my basement. There's a little floating bone there. Hang it in my basement probably for about a week, maybe a little longer. until that turns into a nice cured piece of ham, really peppery, slice it thinly, great piece of charcuterie. So there's another little ham roast there. Still working on getting this bone out, but instead of trying to think of it as getting the bone out, I think of peeling the layers of muscle off the bone. So now I just liberated this side of the bone, that meat off of that side, so now I'm going to liberate the other side. And each of these muscles works slightly differently, so you're going to cook them slightly differently. That's why I like to actually follow the seams between the muscles as opposed to just willy-nilly cutting straight down and through. And I actually, when I'm cutting this bone off, I'll actually just slice all the way down like this. And the reason is that I love making soup out of this ham bone and the meat that's underneath. So I just leave all of that meat on, and that makes a nice pot of beans. Some people would take that all off. I leave it right on and put it in that stock pot. Okay, so now we have a couple choices here. I can leave this as one whole roast, although I have a couple of different muscle groups in here that are going to cook slightly differently. Or I can turn it into a couple more noix de jambons, smaller roasts like this. I think probably I'm going to turn it into 2 big roasts. So I'm going to find the seam here, like that. And these will be nice long roasts that we can tie up and slice and make look beautiful. And we'll just square this off. This can go into sausage meat. So that's a nice little 2-person sweetheart roast right there. And then this we could turn into 2 sweetheart roasts. I'm going to leave it whole and just square off these ends so it looks pretty. And that'll be a nice ham roast as well. We could also make ham steaks out of this. So basically we just slice about 2 inches like so and take that layer of fat off. And then we would basically butterfly it. So I'd slice almost to the end, but not quite. And then we'd open it up like this and pound it, and we'd have a nice little ham steak. Okay? We could do that with this whole piece, but I'm going to leave it whole as a roast because it looks so beautiful just as is. So now I have a few scraps that I can throw into my sausage pile. I've got fat. I've got my stock bones. I've got my 4 major ham roasts. I've got the skin that I can put on leaner pieces of meat or I can throw into the stock pot. I've got my pork chops here. I've got my loin roast over here. We have our trotters floating around and our hocks. More skin. We've got our beautiful shoulder roast, which we can turn into sausage meat if we want to, or leave as a roast. We've got our lovely copa, my favorite part of the entire pig. We've got a little bit of sausage meat. We'll put that in our sausage pile. More bones. Our picnic. We've got our ribs for stock. And then our fresh belly and our bacon belly. Depending on how much meat you eat, if you do, let's say, every dinner you have meat as your main course, this would probably last for a family of 4 about a month or 2. But if you eat like I do as a meat eater, which is using meat more as a accent in dishes versus a main course, this would last me for almost a year. So I do a lot more curing and brining than I do cooking fresh meat, and that makes it last a lot longer.
I have always loved pigs, and as soon as I could get a pig of my own, I got 2 and started to breed them.